Mara Doyle had exactly $11 in her pocket. Her 6-year-old daughter was home with a fever. Rent was due in 4 days, and she was 4 minutes away from finally clocking out after another 12-hour shift. That was when the man in the torn gray coat walked into the diner. He didn't ask for food. He asked for water, because water was free. Mara looked at his cracked hands wrapped around the empty glass, glanced toward the kitchen, and made a decision she couldn't afford to make. She carried him the last chicken sandwich. "I can't pay for this," the man said quietly. "I know," Mara replied.
I didn't ask you to.
"I wasn't asking you to." 20 seconds later, her manager saw the plate. 30 seconds after that, Mara was standing in the parking lot with her apron in her hands. Fired. For one sandwich. She sat inside her aging car, gripping the steering wheel, wondering how she was going to buy medicine for her daughter, never imagining she'd just changed the course of her life forever. Because the hungry man she'd fed wasn't homeless. He was Adrian Cross, the billionaire CEO of Cross Industries, the same company that had framed her father for a crime he never committed and left him to die in prison 7 years earlier. By sunrise, Adrian would know exactly who Mara Doyle was, and the truth both of them had been running from was about to collide. She drove the 15 minutes to her sister Renee's apartment with the radio off, running numbers in her head that never balanced no matter how many times she recalculated them. Lily's cough had gotten worse over the weekend. The pediatrician wanted a follow-up. Follow-ups cost money. Money required a job. She no longer had one. Renee opened the door before Mara even knocked, phone still pressed to her ear, and mouthed what happened when she saw her sister's face. "I fed a homeless man a sandwich," Mara said, stepping inside. "Apparently that's a fireable offense now." "Mara, please don't tell me it'll work out. I need it to be true, not said." Lily was curled on the couch under a blanket covered in cartoon foxes, cheeks flushed, eyes half closed. She didn't wake when Mara kissed her forehead, and something in Mara's chest cracked a little wider at that. A 6-year-old shouldn't sleep that heavily from a fever that was supposed to be just a cold. That night, Mara sat at Renee's kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down every job she could apply to before sunrise. Diner, grocery store, cleaning service. She wrote each one like a small prayer, though she'd stopped believing prayers were heard a long time ago. Not since her father died in a cell 3 counties over, convicted of a crime she still didn't fully understand, disgraced by a company whose name she refused to say out loud even now, 7 years later. Cross Industries. She hadn't thought about that name in months. She had no reason to think about it now. She was wrong about that too. 3 days later, a woman named Delphine Ashworth called Mara's phone. Mara almost didn't answer. The area code wasn't local, but rent was due tomorrow, and she'd apply to anything with a paycheck attached. "Is this Mara Doyle?" the woman asked, her voice smooth, corporate, careful. "Yes. I'm calling on behalf of a private hospitality placement service. Your name came up for a live-in staff position, meals, light housekeeping, occasional driving support for one client. The pay is generous. Housing is included. We understand you have a daughter. There's a room for her as well." Mara gripped the phone tighter. "Who referred me?" A pause, just half a second too long. "The client requested discretion for now. If you're interested, someone can meet you tomorrow morning to go over details." Every instinct told Mara this was too fast, too easy, too convenient for a woman who'd been unemployed for exactly 3 days. But Lily's cough hadn't gotten better, and generous pay and housing included were words that could save both their lives right now. So she said yes before she let herself think about why a stranger would call her out of nowhere and offer her a job like a rope thrown down a well. She didn't know yet that the rope had been thrown by someone who'd watched her give away her last sandwich to a man in a torn coat, and that the man in the torn coat was going to be the one waiting for her on the other end of it. The address Delphine gave her wasn't a house. It was an estate, gated, sitting behind hedges so tall they blotted out the afternoon sun, the kind of property Mara had only ever seen in the background of magazine photos she flipped past at the grocery store checkout. She parked her car, the one with the reluctant engine, next to a black sedan that probably cost more than she'd made in the last 5 years combined, and she almost turned around. Then Lily unbuckled her seatbelt in the back seat and said, "Mommy, it's like a castle. and Mara made herself walk to the door. A housekeeper named Ines let them in, kind-eyed, older, the first genuinely warm face Mara had seen in days. She led them through a foyer with ceilings twice as tall as any room Mara had ever lived in, and into a study where a man sat behind a desk with his back to them, looking out over the grounds. When he turned around, Mara's stomach dropped. It was him, the man from the diner, the one in the torn gray coat, asking for water because it was free. Except now, he wasn't wearing a torn coat. He was wearing a suit that fit him like it had been made for exactly his body, because it had. His hands weren't trembling. His eyes weren't hollow with hunger. He looked like a different person entirely, and Mara understood, with a cold, sinking clarity, that she'd been fooled. "You," she said. "Mara." His voice was the same. That, at least, hadn't changed. "I owe you an explanation. You owe me a lot more than that." Her hands had curled into fists at her sides. "You had me fired. Do you understand that? I have a daughter. I have rent. I gave you my last sandwich because I thought you needed it, and you let me lose my job over it. And now you're, what? Dressing up in a suit and calling me here like this is some kind of game." It wasn't a game. He stood, slowly, like a man approaching something fragile. "My name is Adrian Cross." The room seemed to tilt. Mara had to steady herself against the back of a chair. "Cross," she repeated, and the word tasted like poison in her mouth. "As in Cross Industries." "Yes, you're the son." "I am." 7 years of grief and rage that Mara had folded up small and buried somewhere she never let herself visit rose up all at once, hot and fast. "My father worked for your family for 11 years. 11 years, Mr. Cross. And when your company needed someone to blame for money that went missing, they put his name on it. He died in prison protecting people who were never punished for what they actually did. And now you're telling me you're his name. You're that family. And you brought me into your house." Adrian didn't flinch, though something in his face had gone pale and still. "I know who your father was, Mara. I know what happened to him. That's exactly why you're standing in this room right now." Lily, sensing the tension without understanding it, pressed herself against her mother's leg. Mara put a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder and took a step back toward the door. "We're leaving. Please." For the first time, Adrian's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough for Mara to see something underneath it, something that looked almost like desperation. "My father spent the last year of his life trying to write a letter he never had the courage to send. I found it after he died. It was addressed to your father's family. He wanted to make things right, and he ran out of time. I've spent 6 months trying to find you, not to hurt you again, but to finish what he couldn't. By having me fired from a diner job, I didn't know who you were when I walked into that diner." His voice dropped, quieter now, almost raw. "I go to places like that sometimes. Alone. No driver, no assistant, no name. It's the only way I ever find out who someone really is, instead of who they pretend to be around money. I wasn't testing you. I didn't even know your name until I saw it on your employee badge, and by the time I understood who you were, you'd already been let go, and I couldn't fix it fast enough before you drove away." Mara stood very still, searching his face for the lie she was certain had to be there. She didn't find it. That frightened her more than if she had. "Why does any of this matter to you?" she asked. "My father's been dead 7 years. Nothing you do now changes that." "No," Adrian admitted. "It doesn't. But it can change what happens to you and your daughter now. And it can put your father's name back where it belongs, publicly, permanently, not as the man who stole from Cross Industries, but as the man who was framed by someone still sitting on its board." The room went very quiet. "Someone still there," Mara said slowly. "The person who actually did it." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Yes." "Who?" "That," he said. "I can't tell you yet. Not until I have proof that can't be buried again. But I need time, and I need you close enough that when the truth comes out, no one can say I did this quietly to protect my own name instead of clearing your father's. I need a witness who has every reason to distrust me and still watch me do it anyway." It should have sounded insane. It should have sounded like exactly the kind of manipulation Mara had spent years bracing herself against. But there was something in the exhaustion behind his eyes, something in the way his hands, still faintly callous from God knew what, gripped the edge of the desk, that made her believe him despite every reason not to. If I say yes, Mara said carefully, and this is some kind of trick. It isn't. Then you're going to owe my daughter an apology too, for putting her mother through this. For the first time, something like a real smile touched the corner of Adrian's mouth. I intend to owe her a lot more than an apology. Mara didn't know yet how much those words would cost him, or how much they'd cost her. The first 2 weeks passed in careful, uneasy rhythm. Mara cooked meals she didn't need to cook, because Ines had it handled, cleaned rooms that were already spotless, and mostly avoided being alone in a space with Adrian for longer than it took to hand him a cup of coffee. Lily, however, held no such reservations. She found Adrian in the library on the 4th day, sitting with a stack of documents he wasn't really reading, and asked him bluntly if he had any dogs. He didn't. By the following week, he did. A rescue mutt with one floppy ear that Lily named Biscuit, over Adrian's mild protest that the estate's previous dogs had all carried more distinguished names. She likes you, Mara said one evening, watching from the doorway as Adrian let Lily win at checkers with an obviousness that would have insulted an adult. She's easy to like. Adrian didn't look up from the board. Unlike her mother, who still checks the locks on her door every night like I might come in and rearrange her furniture. You have people who could, if you wanted. I don't want anything from you that isn't given, Adrian said, and something in the plainness of it landed harder than any grand declaration could have. It was around then that Vanessa Pierce arrived, unannounced, in a car even more expensive than the one already parked in the drive. Mara learned who she was before Vanessa ever said a word, simply by the way Ines stiffened and Adrian's shoulders dropped half an inch, like a man bracing for weather. Adrian, darling, Vanessa said, sweeping into the foyer as though she owned it, which, Mara would later learn, she very nearly did. Her family's holding company controlled the shipping contract Cross Industries depended on for half its overseas business. You've been positively invisible. The board is starting to whisper that you've lost interest in the merger. Or in me. I've been occupied, Adrian said evenly. Vanessa's eyes slid to Mara. Standing in the hallway with a tray of tea, she now felt absurdly conspicuous holding. And who is this? Mara works here, Adrian said. Does she? Vanessa's smile was thin, polite, and utterly without warmth. How quaint. It took Mara exactly one conversation with Ines to learn the shape of what she'd stepped into. Vanessa and Adrian had been informally engaged for over a year, an arrangement pushed hard by both families, tied to a merger worth more money than Mara could picture as a real number. Adrian hadn't proposed. Vanessa acted publicly as though he already had. He doesn't love her, Ines said quietly, folding linens with the unhurried patience of someone who'd worked in that house long enough to have earned the right to gossip a little. But love has never been the point for families like that. The point is what a marriage can merge. Then why hasn't he just said no? Ines gave her a long look. Because saying no publicly cost the company $900 million in shipping contracts and the goodwill of a board that's already looking for reasons to remove him. Mr. Cross's father built this company on debts he never told anyone about. If Adrian loses that merger, he loses everything his father spent his whole life building and burying. Mara set down the teacup she was holding a little too hard. Debts, she repeated. What kind of debts? Ines's mouth pressed into a thin line, the look of a woman who'd said one sentence more than she meant to. That's not my story to tell, dear. Ask him yourself, if you're brave enough. Mara was. That night, she found Adrian on the terrace, a glass of untouched scotch in front of him, staring at nothing. Tell me about the debts, she said, without preamble. Adrian's head turned slowly. Ines has a talent for saying just enough to be dangerous. Then finish what she started. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Mara nearly turned to leave. Then he spoke, and his voice had none of its usual polish. My father borrowed against the company 11 years ago to keep it from collapsing during a bad quarter. He hid it from the board. He hid it from investors. He hid it, mostly, from himself, pretending the debt didn't exist as long as no one said its name out loud. When the money started disappearing to cover it, someone had to be blamed. My uncle Desmond arranged the paper trail. Your father took the fall because he was the only one in accounting who refused to falsify the numbers which made him easy to frame. The honest man is always the easiest one to hang a lie on, because no one expects him to have secrets worth protecting. Mara's breath caught somewhere behind her ribs. Your uncle? My uncle, Adrian confirmed, is still on the board. Still controls 22% of company shares. Still sits 3 seats down from me at every meeting, smiling like a man who's never once worried about being caught, because for 7 years, he hasn't been. And your father knew. The whole time. My father knew, Adrian said, and something in his voice cracked open, raw and unguarded in a way Mara hadn't seen from him before. He knew, and he let an innocent man die in prison rather than admit the company he loved was built on a lie he told to save it. He wrote that letter I told you about because he couldn't live with it anymore. He died 3 days after finishing it. He never sent it. I found it in a drawer he thought no one would open until after he was gone. Mara sat down slowly across from him, her anger from that first day in the study rearranging itself into something heavier and more complicated. Why didn't you just release it? Publish it. Send it to me the day you found it. Because Desmond has spent 7 years making sure there's no proof left that could survive a legal challenge. A letter from a dead man isn't enough on its own. His lawyers would call it fabricated, or coerced, or simply irrelevant. I need financial records Desmond thinks are buried. I need someone on the inside willing to testify. And I need it all locked down before he realizes I'm looking, because the moment he does, he'll bury it deeper or worse. Worse how? Adrian met her eyes, and for the first time, Mara saw real fear behind them, not for himself. He's already tried once to make sure no one connected to your father's case ever surfaces again to ask questions. I don't know what he'd do if he knew you were standing in this house. The wind picked up across the terrace, and somewhere in the dark hedges beyond the lawn, a light flicked on and off that hadn't been on a moment before. Mara's pulse spiked. Adrian noticed it too, the way his gaze snapped toward the tree line, sharp and sudden, all softness gone from his face in an instant. Get inside, he said quietly. Now. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, that someone might already be listening. The following weeks tightened around Mara like a hand, closing slowly into a fist. Small things first. A car she didn't recognize idling too long outside the gates. A phone call from an unknown number that hung up the second she answered. A folder on Adrian's desk that had clearly been searched by someone who wasn't supposed to have access to his study. Then, less small, Renee called in a panic to say 2 men in suits had come by her apartment asking questions about Mara's father's case, phrasing everything so carefully it sounded almost like a threat wrapped in politeness. They said they were clarifying records for an internal review, Renee said, voice tight over the phone. Mara, I don't like this. Neither do I, Mara admitted. She told Adrian that night, and watched his face harden into an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not anger exactly, but something colder, more focused, the look of a man calculating exactly how much time he had left before something broke. Desmond's moving faster than I expected, he said. He knows I'm looking. He's trying to find out how much I have before I find out how much he's hiding. Then let's finish it, Mara said. Whatever you need. I'll testify. I'll say whatever's true about my father. It's not that simple. Adrian rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion carved into every line of it. The board is voting on the merger with Vanessa's family in 3 weeks. If I don't announce the engagement before then, Desmond will use it as proof I'm unstable, unfit to run the company, and he'll push a vote to have me removed as CEO before I can release anything. If that happens, everything I've gathered disappears with my access the same afternoon. So marry her, Mara said, and hated the way the words tasted leaving her mouth, hated more the flicker of something that crossed Adrian's face when she said it. Hurt, quickly hidden. If it protects the truth, if it gets my father's name back, I don't matter in that math. You matter more than the math, Adrian said quietly. That's the problem. Mara's chest tightened at the plainness of it. The way it landed with none of the polish she still half expected from a man with his name and his money. Adrian, I'm not going to pretend anymore that this started because of a letter my father wrote, he said, standing, crossing the small distance between them like it cost him something to do it slowly instead of all at once. It started there. It didn't stay there. You gave a stranger your last sandwich when you had nothing left to give, Mara. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who calculate exactly what they'll get back before they give anything at all. I didn't know what it looked like when someone didn't. Then I watched you do it without even thinking, and it undid something in me I didn't know was still capable of being undone. The room was very quiet. You don't know me, Mara whispered, but came out unconvincing even to her own ears. I know you gave up a paycheck you couldn't afford to lose because a stranger looked hungry, Adrian said. I know you've spent 7 years grieving a father the world called a thief, and you never once let it make you cruel. I know your daughter drew Biscuit a picture yesterday and wrote my friend under it. And I had to leave the room because it was the first time in longer than I can remember that anyone in this house wanted something from me that wasn't money. His voice caught just slightly. I know enough. Mara didn't remember deciding to close the distance between them. She only remembered, afterward, the way his hand came up slowly to her face like he was asking permission with emotion itself, and the way she didn't step back. It was, of course, exactly the wrong moment for everything to unravel. The knock at the study door came 3 mornings later, sharp and unfamiliar, and Inez's face when she opened it told Mara something was wrong before a single word was said. There are men here, Inez said, voice tight. From the board. They're asking for Mr. Cross. And Mara. She hesitated, clearly unsure how to say the rest. They asked for you too. By name. Mara's stomach dropped straight through the floor. In the foyer stood 3 men in dark suits, and behind them, unmistakably, Desmond Cross. Mara recognized him instantly from the family photographs scattered discreetly around the house. The same sharp jaw as Adrian's, the same eyes gone cold instead of warm. Ms. Doyle, Desmond said, his voice smooth as poured oil. What a pleasant surprise, finding you employed in my nephew's house. Tell me, did he mention to you that your father's conviction is currently under a confidentiality seal, one that prohibits discussing case details with unauthorized third parties? Because if he shared privileged company documents with you, that's not just a family embarrassment. That's a federal matter. Adrian appeared in the doorway behind Mara, so fast she barely registered him moving. Desmond, this isn't the place, isn't it? Desmond smiled, and it did not reach his eyes. I understand you've been quite busy lately. Going through old accounting archives you have no operational reason to access. I thought I'd save everyone some time and clarify the situation directly before rumors start. Ms. Doyle's father was convicted, fairly, by a jury of his peers of embezzlement. That conviction stands. Anyone suggesting otherwise, particularly to further some, his eyes flicked meaningfully between Adrian and Mara, personal arrangement, would be committing slander against this family and this company. I'd hate for that to end badly for someone in Ms. Doyle's position. Single mother, no current employment beyond this house. It would be a shame if this arrangement became legally complicated for her. The threat was so smooth, so wrapped in courtesy, that it took Mara a full second to understand she'd just been threatened in her own hearing, in front of witnesses, in a way that would sound like nothing at all if repeated back to a lawyer. Get out of my house, Adrian said, quiet and lethal. Our house, Desmond corrected pleasantly, until the board says otherwise, which, I suspect, maybe sooner than you think, if this instability continues. He turned toward the door, then paused, looking back at Mara with something almost like pity. For what it's worth, my dear, your father was a decent man who made a foolish choice to protect people who didn't deserve it. I'd hate to see his daughter repeat the pattern. He left without waiting for a response. The silence after the door closed was so heavy Mara could hear her own pulse in her ears. He knows I've been close to finding proof, Adrian said finally, voice tight. That threat wasn't for me. It was for you. He's telling me exactly how he'll hurt me if I keep pushing, by hurting you. Then we stopped pushing, Mara said, though every word felt like glass in her throat. No. Adrian turned to face her fully, something resolute settling into his features. We move faster. Tonight. He led her to a locked drawer in his study Mara had never seen opened, and inside it, a small external drive he'd kept hidden even from his own household staff. My father's private financial ledger. The real one, not the one filed with the board. It shows every transfer Desmond made using your father's signature, forged all of it, and dated weeks after your father was already in custody, which means he couldn't possibly have authorized them himself. Mara's hands trembled as she took it. This proves it. All of it. It proves my uncle forged documents, Adrian said. It doesn't prove my father knew and stayed silent. That's in the letter, only the letter, and Desmond's people have been searching this house for exactly that for weeks. If he finds it before the board vote, he'll destroy it. And then all I have is a drive full of numbers a good lawyer could argue means nothing without the confession that explains them. Then where is it? The letter? Adrian's jaw tightened. Somewhere he'll never think to look. Somewhere that only makes sense to someone who actually knew my father, not just his money. He was quiet for a long moment, and something shifted behind his eyes, a memory surfacing. My father used to say the only honest place in this house was the kitchen, he said slowly, because it was the one room no one performed in. It's where he and your father used to talk, back when they were just two men working too many hours, before any of this money made either of them into someone else. They found it inside a false bottom in an old recipe tin on the highest kitchen shelf, the kind of hiding place a desperate, guilt-ridden man might choose specifically because no board member, no lawyer, no version of himself he'd built for the public would ever think to look there. The letter was exactly as Adrian described, a confession, dated, signed, admitting the debt, admitting Desmond's forged signatures, admitting that an innocent man named Thomas Doyle had died in prison for a crime that belonged entirely to the Cross family. Mara read her father's name in another man's handwriting and had to sit down at the kitchen table, the tin still open in front of her, tears finally coming after 7 years of holding them back. "He's sorry," she whispered. "He was actually sorry. He was a coward who ran out of time to fix what he broke," Adrian said gently, sitting beside her. "But yes, he was sorry. And now, so am I, for every day this took too long to reach you." The board vote was 5 days away, and now they had everything they needed to end it. What neither of them anticipated was that Vanessa Pierce, watching the tension between them build for weeks with the sharp instincts of a woman who'd built her whole life reading rooms for weakness, had already guessed enough of the truth to make her own move first. She arrived the morning of the vote with a folder of her own and a smile that told Mara, instantly, that whatever was inside it was meant to hurt. "I know about the letter," Vanessa said, setting the folder on Adrian's desk without invitation. "Desmond doesn't, not yet. I could tell him within the hour, and your little proof disappears before the board ever sees it." Or, she continued, sliding the folder toward Mara, "You call off whatever this is." Her eyes flicked with distaste toward Mara. "Announce our engagement publicly today, and I make sure Desmond never finds out where you've been hiding it." "You'd let an innocent man's memory stay buried," Adrian said, low and furious, "to save a merger." "I'd let it stay buried a little longer," Vanessa corrected coolly, "to save you, Adrian, whether you believe that or not. You lose the company, you lose the leverage to expose Desmond at all. Martyrs don't win boardroom votes. Survivors. Mara opened the folder despite herself. Inside were photographs. Herself, entering the estate weeks ago. Herself and Adrian on the terrace, close, unmistakably intimate. A printed article draft already formatted for release, headline blaring something about Cross Heir's secret affair with convicted embezzler's daughter, beside a photo of Mara's father's mugshot from 7 years ago. The cruelty of it stole her breath. "You'd publish this." "I'd publish whatever protects what I've spent a year building," Vanessa said simply. "Nothing personal, Ms. Doyle. You're simply standing somewhere I got there first." Adrian's hands had curled into fists at his sides, and for one terrible moment, Mara watched him actually consider it. The marriage, the silence, the years of comfortable lying it would take to protect the company his father had loved more than the truth. She saw the exhaustion in him, the same exhaustion that had worn his father down until he wrote a confession he never had the courage to send. Then Adrian looked at her, and something in his face settled, like a decision finally made all the way through instead of halfway. "No," he said. Vanessa blinked. "Excuse me." "No," Adrian repeated, steadier now. "Publish it. Send it to every outlet you have on retainer. I'm done protecting a lie that's already cost one innocent man his life. If the board wants to remove me for telling the truth about my own family, then they can. I'd rather lose the company than spend the rest of my life being the kind of man who let it happen twice. You're a fool, Vanessa said, but something uncertain had crept into her voice for the first time. Maybe, Adrian said, but I'd rather be a fool who did the right thing 5 years too late than a smart man who never did it all. He turned to Mara before Vanessa had even left the room. The board votes in 2 hours. I need to bring the letter, the ledger, and you, if you're willing. Your testimony matters more than any document, because you're the one who lived what his silence cost. Mara thought of her father, of the 11 years he'd given to a company that let him die for its sins, of the 6-year-old sleeping soundly now in a warm room because a stranger in a torn coat had turned out to be exactly the kind of man his father never was. I'm willing, she said. The boardroom was colder than Mara expected, all glass and steel, and 12 unfamiliar faces watching her walk in beside Adrian like she didn't belong there, which, by every measure that room understood, she didn't. Desmond sat at the head of the table, composure intact, though something flickered behind his eyes when he saw the folder Adrian carried. This is highly irregular, Desmond said, bringing an employee into a closed board session. Ms. Doyle isn't here as an employee, Adrian said, setting the ledger and the letter on the table in full view of every director present. She's here as the daughter of Thomas Doyle, a man this company allowed to die in prison for a crime committed by someone sitting at this table. The room went utterly silent. Adrian laid it out plainly. The debt his father hid, the forged signatures, the dates that couldn't possibly align with a man already in custody. The letter itself, read aloud in a voice that didn't waver even as Desmond's face went the color of old paper. Mara spoke last, her voice steady in a way she didn't feel, describing the father she remembered, a man who came home smelling of ink and printer toner, who never once, in 11 years, complained about the hours this company demanded, who told her the night before his arrest that he trusted the truth to protect him, because he'd never lied about anything in his life. It didn't protect him, Mara said quietly, but it's protecting him now. 7 years too late for him to know it. Not too late for the rest of us. The vote, when it came, wasn't close. Desmond was removed from the board within the hour, his shares frozen pending federal investigation into forged financial records spanning nearly a decade. Adrian remained CEO, not because the board owed him loyalty, but because, as one older director said quietly on his way out, a man willing to burn down his own protection to tell the truth is exactly the kind of man this company should have had running it from the start. The merger with Vanessa's family collapsed within the week. Adrian didn't seem to mourn it. 6 months later, Mara stood in a small courtroom, not as a defendant's daughter this time, but as the woman whose testimony helped the judge formally vacate her father's conviction. 7 years after his death, his name cleared in the same public record that had once called him a thief. She cried in a way she hadn't let herself cry at his funeral, because grief, this time, came wrapped in something that finally felt like justice instead of just loss. Lily, older now by half a year, and considerably more attached to a dog named Biscuit who'd fully relocated to the estate's kitchen floor, asked Mara that evening why she was smiling and crying at the same time. Because sometimes, Mara told her, the world takes a long time to catch up to what was true all along. And when it finally does, it's allowed to feel like both things at once. Adrian found her later on the same terrace where he'd first told her about his father's debts, a ring box in his coat pocket he'd been carrying for 3 weeks, waiting for a moment that felt honest enough to deserve it. I used to think, he said, that the only way to protect something was to control it completely. My father believed that. It's what killed him, slowly, over 11 years of silence. You taught me something different without ever meaning to teach me anything at all. You gave away the last thing you had to a stranger who couldn't repay you, and it didn't diminish you. It was the truest thing about you. I fed a hungry man a sandwich, Adrian, Mara said, laughing through sudden tears. You're making it sound like scripture. Maybe it should be, he said, and got down on one knee, and asked her a question she'd spent years assuming she'd never be asked by anyone, let alone a man who'd once lied to her about his own name. She said yes before he finished the sentence. If you're still here, if this story found you exactly when you needed a reminder that kindness is never wasted, even when it costs you everything in the moment, hit subscribe because there are more stories like this one waiting for you. Share it with someone who needs to believe that good things still come back around. And tell me in the comments, what's the one act of kindness you've never regretted, even when it cost you something? Because in the end, that was the whole truth of it. Thomas Doyle lost his freedom protecting people who never deserved it, and it took 7 years for the world to admit he was right to be honest anyway. Mara lost a job over a sandwich, and it led her to a love she never could have planned for. Kindness rarely pays you back on the day you give it, but it remembers you. It waits. And when the truth finally arrives, however many years late, it arrives carrying everything you were owed all along, and it never once asks whether you deserve to receive it, because the giving was always the point.